So welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice weekend. The main focus for today is going to be talking about your data stories that you submitted for assignment 4. So I thought we could go through those first, and then hopefully we'll have time also to help get both groups able to make pull requests of their projects. So both groups were having some trouble with that, but hoping we can get everyone back, or get everyone doing that. Okay, so would either group like to volunteer to talk about your story first?
I can talk about ours.
Okay.
So we did our story on like the current COVID crisis in India and how it relates to geographic income data. So we looked at correlations between income, like per capita income data for states and COVID case rates and vaccination rates, as well as population density. And then we also looked at it within the district level for 2 states.
Cool. Yeah, so did everyone have a chance to watch this group's story?
I was in a midterms the last hours. So I didn't see it before then, but I just saw it now. And so I can watch it quickly now so that I can have something to say.
Did everyone else get a chance to watch it, or yeah? Okay, so maybe while Amelia is watching it, we can still discuss yeah, so I think Kira, you were in the same group. So
yeah, and I was working on it with us too for a little bit, and then she wasn't feeling well, so she I think she was going to talk to you about that, but
yeah, no worries. That's fine. Yeah, I feel like everyone's schedules are a little bit crazier in these times. I was just referring to the other people who are here. But
I watched this this morning, and I thought it was like so interesting, and I want you guys to like try to publish it somewhere because I feel like it's pretty powerful. Like the data that you found was so cool, and like there wasn't any sort of like doubt in my mind that you guys are right because of like how you formed your argument so like logically and clearly throughout and you like looked at every question from like a couple of different angles, and I thought that was really cool. Some of the jargon I felt like distracted a little bit, or like made it hard for me to like follow along as well. And like, have you heard that like rule of thumb of like try to make sure you like are 100% sure that your audience knows like, or that they only can't understand one word per sentence? Like you want like sometimes that there were like a couple of sentences that had more than one like term that I wasn't familiar with. Like what was that the name of that town? Or not town, maybe it's like a county that's like a perfect, like it was like your case study kind of, the one that was like very unique. Is that like
oh,
yeah, Kerala, it's a state.
Kerala,
Yeah.
Kerala. Okay, so like that was really interesting. I think that you could have like grounded that part a little bit more by, instead of saying like highest income per capita, you could have like dumbed that down and been like, this is one of the richest or poorest counties. Do you know what I mean? And that could have like helped me as like the viewer kind of ground myself a little bit more. But that being said, like I had to back up a couple times to be like, okay, what are they actually saying here? And if I was reading that as a paper, I would have found that like absolutely like perfect. But as a video, I feel like it was I mean, to be fair, it also lended itself to your legitimacy. So it depends on what you're going for. But in terms of the storytelling, maybe you could have like cut some of that jargon. But at the same time, I like believed everything you said because of some of the jargon. So it's a balance, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I wasn't really writing that part, like thinking about how it would sound out loud. I mean, like kind of, but not like with all the technical vocabulary. But that's like a really good point.
Yeah, I think we struggled with like we had so many different, like you're saying, like lenses and so many different like considerations we were trying to make that in order to like fit it, we potentially had to compromise a little bit on like slowing down the explanation. So I definitely agree that was like a balance that we were kind of dealing with.
Well, it's definitely difficult, like as a researcher, when you're looking at income per capita and you don't want to like make it seem like you're looking at something really simple when it's actually kind of complicated. But then at the same time, you kind of have to sacrifice that occasionally and be like, yeah, we're looking at like the richest versus the more impoverished places. And I thought that like a tiny change in words there could have like helped me, because then that's really easy for me to understand. And then I can listen to more of like what exactly you're telling me about that place, instead of being like, okay, so per capita it was high, which means they were wealthy. And then like, okay, this is like, yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
But it's like frustrating because like as the researcher, you're like, but no, it was actually really complicated and it wasn't simple. And like, I want to like kind of maintain that integrity a little bit. So.
Cool, that's great feedback. Nathan or Amelia, did either of you have comments?
Yeah, I think I also like might need to watch it again, but based off of like the first like quick go around, I thought like your like data visualizations like looked very like nice and like aesthetically pleasing. And I thought like especially like the map like looked really cool, and how like you first had it like one color, and then like you were able to like put in like those little yellow ones, like that really caught my like attention and made me focus in on those spots. And I was like, yeah, I had like one question, I guess, like for like the first like visualization of like the per capita versus COVID cases, is that saying like the higher income households had more cases or no? Okay.
It was by state. So
Oh,
yeah, we couldn't find like enough granular data to make that like by household, but basically, yeah, like the highest income states had more COVID. And that was why we talked about population density, because we sort of hypothesized that those things were related.
mhm. Well, yeah, like overall, though, like I thought it was like a great like presentation, like well said. So
Cool. Amelia, did you have feedback?
Yeah. Need to collect my thoughts. Like, you know, when you like just get out of a midterm like 30 seconds before class starts, and like, I just don't even know where my head is right now. The words are right now. But I just watched this, and okay, so yeah, I really liked it. I don't know what Hannah said, but I liked the map also. I liked your graphics, like they're really clean. One thing I'm thinking about, I don't think we did this either, but like I'm looking at the India state per capita income versus COVID cases, and like looking at that line, that trend, it would be cool to have like one of the bigger points, just have like the cases, like have like the data for that data point, if you know what I mean, almost like a data label, so that it's easier. Because like when you thing all the way up here, it's kind of like your eyes have to do a this and a this to like figure out what that means. So I think
that's a great idea.
Helpful. And I'd say that's like, I guess the big thing, or like the main thing I thought of in terms of graphs. But other than that, I liked how clean they were. But yeah, having a label or a color or something could draw attention. And then the other thing, just like we had the same thing, is just the speed. Like, how can we collectively as a class brainstorm how to get all this information in under 5 minutes? Because I know that is something that we were working a lot on, as well as getting this under 5 minutes. And so like synthesizing, and really, it's hard to hear a story and it's like, oh wow, everything is so interesting. I want to hear it all. It's hard to know where to cut. But I feel like that's something as a class that we can like work on. That's pretty much yeah, those are my major thoughts, but nice job.
Yeah, thanks. That
Cool.
label idea is really good. And now that I think about it, I could have done that on the map too, or like we could have to point out which state we were talking about. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, that I think I agree. It's a good idea. Okay, yeah. So I also thought overall you did a great job. I had a bunch of feedback, so I had a bunch of ideas. So I thought your intro, just like going chronologically, I thought your intro was great. You had like, things seemed great, case counts were low, and then crisis. So I think that was kind of and then you had like newspaper headlines coming in and that photo. I thought that was like really great for building drama and like really kind of set the background, gave the background information and the context for the story. I think when you were showing the photo and newspaper articles, I noticed this particularly because I watched your video right after the other group's video, like the Dartmouth COVID spread video. That the other video it feels very kind of like there's constant movement. And then I viewed your video and it was like snapshot and then snapshot. So it felt kind of like watching a PowerPoint. I thought you could potentially use like, introduce some sense of movement by like using zooming effects or something like that, just like really subtle stuff to kind of give a little bit more of a dynamic feel. I don't know how I would have felt if I watched the videos in the opposite order. Maybe I would have felt like the other video was like too moving all over the place. And then, so, there's some, anyway, like kind of habituation sort of effect there potentially. But I also noticed there are a few places throughout the story where you had kind of blank white screens as you're kind of transitioning from one section in the narrative to the next. And I thought those could potentially be used to like, increase engagement by maybe showing more photos or like some sort of summary statement, something to increase engagement so that you don't like lose attention during those moments. Like I thought what was being said during those times was great, but then I could have used like some sort of visual aid to kind of back up what you were saying just during, it was, just a few moments during the video. So it wasn't like, I thought overall it was, visually compelling and well presented and everything, but just kind of those particular moments were jarring for me. I thought your overall tone, like the speaking tone, was really great. So I kind of interpreted it as like factual, but also conversational, which was, I thought, a great balance. It seemed like the speech rate was a little fast at times. I had the impression maybe like it was sped up, artificially. It wasn't so fast that I couldn't understand it. And I thought it overall worked well, but it got a little fast in like a few sections. I just like started to notice, okay, well, that's like a very high speech rate. Yeah, hard to fit in. I think brainstorming like what to cut and how to fit things into 5 minutes would be, a good thing to try, talk about. I think not just for this story, but it's challenging when you've got so much stuff that you're trying to cram in. Yeah, but like overall, like style and like the tools you used, that I thought you did a great job. I had a few questions also on like the content, so like, or the conclusions you drew. So the first thing that I was surprised about was the positive correlation between like COVID infection rates and income, because that was kind of the opposite of what I was expecting. And so one thing that came to mind was like per capita income is kind of an average measure. And like averages can be skewed by a small number of like very high or very low earners, or per capita measures can be skewed by a few, kind of ends of the distribution. And so I was wondering, like, I found myself wondering as I was kind of watching those figures go by, if maybe what could be driving the infection rates is something about like wealth inequality. So like the spread of it, like the difference between the highest and lowest earners or something like that, which could be skewing the average and showing up as these like kind of skewed distributions. But I don't know if that's it, but it was just surprising that the like richest locations were associated with the highest infection rates. And then the other kind of confusing thing there was like both the infection rates and vaccination rates were positively correlated like with each other and with income. And I just found myself thinking like, shouldn't vaccinations decrease infection rates? And so like, I think you kind of got at this by saying like maybe something else is going on, like maybe vaccinations or resources are being like targeted, in a not like a kind of an unfair or biased way, which could be kind of driving these effects. But I was also thinking like maybe there's, in addition to kind of unfair spread of these resources, I thought like, could it be that
just when you started pressing return to and to finish rather than closing the shape, and then going down into your advanced menu, giving rounded corners.
Oh, okay.
My bad. Sorry.
No worries. I thought like, I was wondering if maybe vaccinations could be, or resources are being targeted like in response to outbreaks. And then by the time the vaccines get there, it's too late. Or I didn't know if that was potentially going on, but that was like a thought that came through my head. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly what was going on. Like maybe I think it has to do, like we would have to look at like data over time to figure that out. But the rates of infection that we used were like total cases per 100,000 within that state. So like it's like over the entire pandemic, the total.
Oh, interesting.
So I
Okay,
don't know,
so
like,
it's not time varying.
yeah, no.
Interesting. Okay,
So
yeah.
that might have
Okay.
to do with something like with like the vaccination data being not related to it because it's like over the whole pandemic.
Or it could be like if COVID is really bad, more people are motivated to get vaccinated, and governments are motivated, and healthcare workers are motivated to get the vaccine out to those locations. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
that was
maybe
also, oh, sorry. I was just gonna say that was also why we started looking at population density, because we were seeing sort of like, we couldn't find any of this in like government data, like the stuff that we were looking at when we were doing our own analysis, but we did see some stuff just like in background research that a lot of times like a lot of the wealth is concentrated in like urban areas. So we were sort of thinking that a potential like confounder is that like wealthier people are more likely to live in cities that have like higher transmission rates. So that was what we were hoping to get more information about when we went to the district level in the 2 states. But yeah, you're right. Like there was a lot going on that I think we could have like gotten more out of if we had done over time or something.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. You also mentioned like you had like one thing that I think bolstered your argument. You had you showed like a positive link between per capita income and vaccination rates. And then like, you right around that time you had information about like costs of the vaccine for different categories of vaccination centers. And I thought that was like a good way of supporting your inequality argument. And then also on that slide, so you mentioned like like, I thought it was really helpful you converted rupees to dollars. So that helped me like get a, 400 or 600. That seems like a lot of, that's a big number. And then when you convert it to like, okay, it's like on the order of $6. Like I didn't have a good sense of like what that means. So like, maybe if you compared that to like per capita income or some other measure to like help illustrate whether or not these amounts are like are they prohibitively expensive? Are they like and then like what proportion of the population would have trouble affording the vaccines, maybe at like public and or private hospitals, et cetera. Sorry, Isha, it looks like you wanted to jump in there.
No, I was just like, I did find some of that stuff for information on that. But I like didn't think I had the time to put it in, but it was just like,
Yeah,
some people that's like, or for most of the population, that's like in some states, that's like half of a month, like their monthly earnings to get like your
wow.
whole family vaccinated. So it is like pretty prohibitive.
Okay, yeah, that's huge. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that helps contextualize. Okay. And then, yeah, so Kira, you started to mention this, that there was this like positive correlation between population density and infection rate, and then also population density and income level. So you kind of described population density as being the mediating factor in that kind of chain of, of three kind of quantities. I was like, at least in my, like, as I was watching it, what came to mind for me was like maybe income level is that it could be described as the mediating variable there, because it's like, if more people, if you have the resources to move wherever you want, then like maybe you want to move to the places where the like resources are, or the amenities are, I don't know. And that could concentrate people in urban areas. And then that increases population density, which also increases the spread of any disease, including COVID. Anyways, okay, now that I'm talking through that, I can see the framing of population density as the mediating variable there. But I think there's like, it just didn't seem totally, like, I'm not sure if population density is the only possible mediating variable there. Like it could be driven by income, or I guess it could be driven by COVID spread, but my guess is that populations haven't migrated that much in the pandemic, but I guess that could be looked into. And then let's see. I guess my last note is, I thought is it Kerala? No, Kerala. Yeah, okay. Every time I pronounce it in my head, it's the wrong way. And then I'm like self-correcting. And then I'm like, wait, I did self-correct. Okay. Yeah, Kerala. Okay. I thought that case study was really interesting. And then I also thought like that case study did a great job of like supporting your conclusions that you ended up with, like increasing access to healthcare across all income levels is the best way to ensure access for low income individuals in particular. So I thought that was like a really clean way of like framing that final message. And then like I thought ended on a really strong note where you're like, a message for moving forward and how to fix the situation, which I thought is, yeah, it's great. It's hard to end on a positive note for such a terrible crisis, but I thought for I don't know, it made it easier to digest, I thought, which I think is overall a good thing. Yeah, so overall, I'm just noticing in my very first comment that I forgot to say, your YouTube video has a typo in the title. India is spelled wrong on the India. It's like Anida is how it's written. But yeah, it's easy to fix that. Yeah, overall, awesome job. I thought it was, really well done overall. So good job. Okay. So any other comments, questions, thoughts related to the India crisis story?
Actually, when you were talking about I called the population density a mediating variable, but would it be better to maybe describe it as a confounding variable that affects both variables separately?
Yeah, that maybe, I think that would have, yeah, I like that.
Okay.
I think that would have been helpful. So the other, I guess that also reminds me of so related to Amelia's comment about cramming, there's so much you want to cram in, it's a 5-minute story. I think there are strategies for both stories that, I want to get back to, okay, what's the right balance here? What can and can't you, what's the scope of what you can convey in a 5-minute story? And so I think it was interesting. Both groups kind of fell on somewhat opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how many specific analyses you put in your story. I thought both stories were effective, and there's no correct number of analyses, but yeah, it was an interesting stylistic choice. Okay, cool. So let's move on to the other group story about Dartmouth and spreading COVID to the community or not. I think Hannah, Nathan, and Amelia, were you the only? I think you were the only 3 group members. Okay, cool. So do one of you want to give a 1 or 2 sentence summary, and then we can get feedback?
Yeah, so basically we were interested to see if the spike in cases at Dartmouth led to a spike in the surrounding community, referring to our outbreak that we had at the end of February, and kind of also looking at the fact that we've been put under a lot of heat in the community, that were spreading illness, that were irresponsible, and so really just kind of exploring more how cases were impacted in the weeks immediately following our outbreak.
Cool. So I guess Isha and or Akira, did either or both of you have a chance to watch the video? And did you have any comments or feedback?
Yeah, I thought your guys' was really, really well done. I loved all the video clips and visuals that you did. As Professor Manning was saying, all of the movement. I really appreciated, it kept me engaged and felt like a real news story, which was really cool. I also I know we talked about it in class previously, but I found the fact that cases in their surrounding counties decreased after the outbreak really interesting and surprising in some ways, not because I thought that necessarily like Dartmouth students were doing anything incredibly wrong, but just because that is kind of surprising with the amount of contact. So I think that was a really cool finding. I was pretty curious, like, because a lot of your media coverage that you guys were talking about was related to like fall and Halloween. I would have been curious to see like if there was any data about that outbreak as well, to see if you guys could have like kind of compared. And I know you guys had trouble like getting the data because you had to go into archives, so that might not have been possible. But if the data had been there, I think that could have been cool. Just to have a little more data analysis to kind of drive the connection between the analysis that you did and the media stuff that you included. But like overall, I thought it was super interesting and well done. Yeah.
And I agree with a lot of what Kira just said. I also really liked how long you spent on like the background and the story. I thought like I knew everything that was going on, but I think that like it was a good way of like compiling all that information and making it into like a cohesive storyline. So yeah, I liked all like the background setup dramatization that you did.
Cool.
I tried to so one of my jobs when we split up the script was like explaining why we chose the data set that we did choose. And that's that part where I was like, oh, the minute scale of the data made it difficult. That's mostly true as well, because there weren't enough cases to be able to even see a trend then. But also it was for the Halloween situation specifically, there was no data available to us from Dartmouth itself, so we couldn't even look into the archives of did we have cases then. I'm pretty sure there was one of the article that we found said that there was one case at the time, but there's no way of verifying that based on the Dartmouth COVID dashboard, and they never responded to our emails. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't do Halloween, but I think we could have made that clearer. It sounds like we should have made that clearer, that we were using the actual spike as a conduit for how we were going to approach that question.
Yeah, we also, I guess, could have approached it how we ended up approaching the this past winter one, by just looking at overall cases and seeing in the weeks after Halloween if there was something. But again, I think there only were, I don't even think there were more than 10 cases at all in Dartmouth. And so it would be hard to tell, could that spike have come from the community? Whereas here it was very clear there were over 200 cases at Dartmouth. So definitely there were a lot. I also think that was an interesting comment, or Kira, I was also interested in seeing how the cases fell off, and maybe we could have spent a moment hypothesizing on that to draw attention to it more, in the sense of wow, yeah, there was a decrease, but also not having someone maybe think oh, is that a fluke? Things worked out too well. I don't know. But I know my hypothesis is that our quarantining and isolation helped. And then I wrote this in our notebook script as well, but that potentially I know the town it might have put people more on guard. It was kind of a reminder, okay, don't let your guard down. COVID is still out there. And so people might have been more cautious in the weeks after, which could have been why cases decreased. But the point is that they did decrease regardless of how they did, which was really cool to see.
It's somewhat dangerous to make that argument, because if your main argument, this is not related to what the content of your story, but just based on that comment, if your argument is that Dartmouth is kind of isolated from the community, arguing that extra precautions by Dartmouth positively impacts the community can backfire, because then it's well, if you don't do those precautions, we could say it's a negative impact on the community. So anyways, that it's a double-edged sword sort of situation.
Yeah, I see that. I meant more all the positive cases went into the isolation housing. So they weren't.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like extreme vigilance. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so overall, I thought, yeah, this was also really well done story. You had, really great visuals, like really engaging and like continually in motion. I thought you did a really nice job of like smoothly integrating clips from various sources, and they kind of like smoothly transitioned and faded into each other. I thought that was really well done. And then like the overall tone, like the narrative tone, I thought like the kind of adjectives that came to mind for me while I was listening was like straightforward and serious. So kind of like a news reporter style, which I thought was a really like nice balance for this story. And then overall, I think the like kind of key points were, well argued and backed up with appropriate data visualizations. I had a few suggestions for, tweaks or, other things to, think about. I think, I guess for both stories, but it particularly popped out for this story and the way you were telling it. I thought like some sort of animated map showing like spread of, transmission or lack thereof, would have been like just really made that argument stick, I think. And then like I know you tried to do the web scraping and it was tricky and or not linked properly, et cetera. But yeah, so there may be nothing to be done about that, but I think it would have been, well, I found myself wishing for like higher resolution information into like, okay, what's Dartmouth doing versus the community? It's just a shame because like that information exists and the data are there somewhere, but it's a bummer that we don't have access to it necessarily. And then, yeah.
Oh, I had something to say on that, but you can finish and then I can.
Yeah, you can jump in.
Oh, yeah. So we basically had like 1 week of Dartmouth data before the online site started to fail and before like the numbers started to mismatch. And so we got up through like 140 cases, but we know that in total there were over 200 or something like that. So that's why we had a graph, but we're hesitant to like move forward with it because we're like, okay, well, somewhere in here there's a mismatch, and so we don't want to be misleading. But yeah, we're also bummed. We literally looked at like every possible thing someone could.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sometimes how it is. One important kind of thing is, so at one point in the story you said, what would we expect if Dartmouth was transmitting to the community? And I think it was a kind of made up figure that you flashed there of like an example of what, a Dartmouth peak followed by a community peak would look like. But I was like, it's really important to be super clear when data is made up, especially in that sort of scenario, because like if that one little second of your video was taken out of context, I think that simple graph could be really harmful. So like even just like having a label on it, like simulated data, if this was true. Yeah, like I think could be a nice thing. But like it was clear from the context of the video as a whole what the message was and what you were showing, but like it's all like, particularly for like sensitive topics, it can be really bad if you like, have a graphic that's kind of that could be just taken by itself in a way that you didn't intend it.
This is the one where it like shows like if the community was right and like there being a lot of cases after.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think you're right.
because it was labeled exactly the same as the real data graph, which you showed later, which shows like a clear decrease. So yeah. And then I thought the word cloud analysis was interesting. Like, you know, it was interesting. One minor comment is it's not really a sentiment analysis. So a sentiment analysis would imply like doing some sort of quantification of the positive or negative valence of the text. So what, like the word cloud analysis is like an effective strategy for visualizing text, but it's not quite the same thing as a sentiment analysis. So it's just a kind of misuse of that term, but it was a nice analysis. And then, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, so yeah, like we could just like maybe like change the word to like and like an analysis based off of like the word strength or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think like,
yeah,
you know, you could talk about it as a word cloud, or what are the most commonly used words in this body of text, et cetera. But a sentiment analysis has a, you know, specific meaning from like a natural language processing perspective. So, yeah. And then my last comment is I thought your, you know, end message was, you know, really effective, really powerful. You know, don't blame for, you know, something like, you know, people died before examining the facts. So you don't want to throw out accusations like that before, you know, having the information in hand. I thought that was a really effective argument. Cool. Yeah, so yeah, and you know, regarding these suggestions, like, you know, if you wanted to redo, like you can redo the stories if you want, but I thought the stories were great. I don't think you have to redo them. And like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend spending your time on that. I'm just saying, like, if you were to go back in time and redo it, like, you know, or on future stories, these are things to take into account. But I'm not suggesting either group goes back and redoes something about for this project. I thought both groups did a great job for this project. So it, you know, some things are things to keep in mind for future projects. Okay. Okay, so got a wood chipper going in the background, but hopefully, well, can you hear what I'm saying at all? Okay, so hopefully my noise canceling is sort of working. Okay, so I wanted to say a few things about like how much information you can cram into a 5-minute story. So there's, you know, no one right answer, first of all. So there's not like a, you know, formula for determining if this is the number of minutes, how many points do I get to make. But in general, people remember like 1 or 2 things from a 5-minute story. I mean, even from an hour long, you know, if you give like a long keynote lecture somewhere, people might take away like 3 or possibly 4 things, and then like forget a couple of them at random, you know, the next day. But you kind of get 1 or 2 points to make. So you can back that up with additional analyses. Like, you know, 1 point could have many aspects of supporting it, but adding too much nuance can become overwhelming for a short story like this. Yeah, I guess the question I try to ask when I'm like really compressing a presentation or, you know, one of my stories is like, you you put out all the, I used to actually like, have pieces of paper I like arranged on a table with like my key points, but now I do it like in Keynote or on my iPad or something, but because I started to like trees. But the, you can like take all your points if however you want to organize them, and then say like, for each thing you want to say, you can ask, is this absolutely necessary to like further the like key message of my story? So like you have, okay, what is your key message? That's really important. If that's not clear to you, like it's not going to be clear to your audience either. And then for every point, okay, if I'm introducing this graph, is that like adding nuance or something interesting in furtherance of my key goal? Or is it like kind of an interesting aside that isn't directly related to my goal? It's okay to add like humor and interesting asides, but if you have, you maybe get like one of them in a 5-minute story that, but like, then you want it to be kind of quickly forgotten. So like increasing engagement, but not distracting. Yeah. Anyways, don't know if, any other thought, like, I don't know, what are your thoughts on this?
I know this is something I struggle with a lot, like that balance between giving enough like details and context to make it a story and like, but like not giving too much that detracts from it. And it's tough because I definitely tend to give like more details than are necessary, but sometimes I'll find that I try to be super succinct and just get right to the point. And then someone's like, okay, wait, like I'm not quite getting it. And it like turns out there was a detail that would have made the story more necessary. And so it's really hard to pinpoint like what is that detail or subset of details that you need to provide context. And then if there's extra time, what are some marks that can kind of enhance the story, maybe add some humor or just be like a good illustrative example. And then like what marks the point of going too far where it starts to detract from your point because you're just giving too much info. So there's like really balance that's hard to strike.
So if you're like writing a novel or you're like, trying to put together like a feature length movie, you have a lot of time and like, bandwidth and space to like tell a full story. But if you're like writing a short story or, putting together a 5-minute video, you have to like, to me, the most useful trick is like, you're not going to be able to build up someone's knowledge base from scratch in 5 minutes. So everything is about leveraging what people are like, what's already in your audience's brains. And can you bootstrap off of that to like lead them to make the assumptions you want them to make and the logical leaps you want them to make. And like, you're kind of leading them in a direction, but they are going to have to like fill in the gaps that you're not saying, along the way based on their own prior experiences. If like, I think the storytellers who do this best. So like, if you remember back in the first week of the course, you watched some like movies from Pixar telling how they tell stories. If you've seen like Pixar shorts, they're like 5-minute stories. And within the first 30 seconds, you've already built a mental model of like, okay, what's the background of the character? I feel like, what's the conversation I might expect to have with them if I met them randomly on the street in pre-COVID times, et cetera. Like, what are the rules of the universe that this character lives in and this story is taking place in? And it's all conveyed in like a super, super compressed amount of time. And it's done by like giving you just the right cues to make like, so that you can fill in the gaps that are not being told to you by making assumptions. But it's like, the balance is like, what do and don't you have to explicitly state? Nathan, did you have a question.
Or yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, like for me, like I feel like the times I'm most successful telling a story is like when I'm able to like orient them quick, and then like everything I have to say after that like is like building up and like is more important than the last thing I said until I get to like my final like here's what happened, like here's like the point of my story. And and like because like yeah, like you don't want to like lose your audience and like say something that's like not that important and like have them forget like what you're getting towards. um Even if like the content you say like is like in itself like funny or like cool or like important in itself, but like it isn't part of the whole. Like I think it all needs to be like building towards something. I don't know.
Well, some stories are effective if they're non-linear. So I don't know that like everything always has to build like kind of in a monotonically increasing way, but
Yeah.
one of my former mentors, who was like a really awesome writer, used the analogy of like, if you imagine you had to pay for each word. So he had like a document that's like, okay, it costs like $1 for an adjective, like $20 for a superlative, like it's really interesting. And then it's, like, 50 cents for like like a grammatically necessary word. And then you to write a one-page document, you get like $500. So how are you going to fill it in? And different goals mean different words cost different amounts, but like you can kind of think about what is the attention cost of adding a particular piece to your story. Like, showing a white screen, it's not information that's going into someone's head like per se, but it could cause someone to lose interest or focus, and then their mind starts to wander. And so then they pay a cost after that, like when you move to the next part of the story, and now they have to pull their thoughts back. And so they're using some of that mental effort to pull their thoughts back instead of processing exactly what you're saying. But then on the flip side, if you're showing like a ton of stuff, like information overload, then you can kind of get sensitized to that and pull back from processing what's in the story. And so that can like be distracting too. But it's, there's a balance where you're like, okay, what is someone going to be thinking at each moment? And are they going in the direction I want them to be going in?
Yeah, I know you're right, like right about like there not being like there being effective stories that are non-linear, but I'm like trying to think of like some examples. Like, do you have like I guess like some good ones that come to mind?
So a lot of mystery stories.
Yeah.
You'll have a situation that's kind of ambiguous, then something will happen. You add a little bit of nuance to the narrative. Then you revisit the past experience and you maybe get a little more information, then a little more happens, and then you revisit. So it's kind of got this looping structure to it. And that can be a really effective way of like gradually building up an understanding, but you're kind of, by revisiting the same thing again and again, you're like weaving in more and more thoughts, and you're building up this kind of rich tapestry of like understanding about this one thing that you keep revisiting. So you can do that.
Yeah. Or like ones with like flashbacks, and is that kind of an example?
There are lots of ways this could be implemented. You could have literal flashbacks where you're like replaying a clip from earlier in a film, or like revisiting a scene in a story. But it could also be like, okay, you present information one way, and then you say the same thing again, but present it or plot the data in a different way, or like look at a different perspective or a different side.
And I didn't expect you to like remember this at all, but my first data story, I kind of did that, where I talked about like the Golden State Killer And like I kept
Yeah.
like DNA and then going back to the Golden State Killer. So yeah, that's an example, I guess.
Yeah, so I think in that story, that was a really interesting narrative style, because it was like the Golden State Killer was a little bit tangential to your main point, which was about like privacy and who owns your who owns your information and stuff like that. But I thought that was a really effective way of kind of anchoring the story. And so that's kind of like an exception to the building linearly rule. Also, it's like maybe an extraneous detail can help you, like, it can be the glue that holds the story together, even if it's not the story itself. Or it's like you could think of it like a substrate that your story exists in, but it's not necessarily the same thing as the story.
Are there any like important psychological, I guess, like human tendencies that you think about when you're telling a story, and like in terms of like your audience, and like how like susceptible they are to like like how you're saying something or like what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is my research area. So yeah, I definitely think about this stuff. The key principle that I try to keep in mind is like, so there's this principle in how we study memory called context, where it kind of means the same thing as like narrative context, but it's like formally defined as the set of thoughts that you have that could be driven by the external world or by your own past experiences that are being kind of spontaneously remembered. And that kind of mental state that you go into when you experience a new event, or when you get like a new little nugget of information, is what your memory system uses to index that information by relating it to other things and also retrieve that piece of information, or like your memory of that experience later. And so it's tricky to do this, but if you can remind people not only of like the specific thing you want them to remember, but of other things that they've mentally linked to that tidbit, maybe earlier in your story or in their own past, then that's going to cause them to start spontaneously thinking about the thing that you want them to think about. So like a classic example of this is like using pre-built in associations is like dramatic music in a movie will cause you to think about other times you've heard dramatic music, which will tend to go with kind of like, intense feelings, your heart's beating, et cetera, fast, et cetera. And so that's going to like evoke that response, even if the specifics of what you're experiencing wouldn't normally evoke that response. So it's a way of kind of bootstrapping off of your prior experiences to like get you the information quicker.
So if like people are trying to create like a 5-minute story, is that like something that's possible to do? To slide in like a little association thing in the beginning and then like have it like come into play towards the end?
Absolutely. Yeah. Pixar shorts are great at this. Those are like 5 minutes and super, it's a full story in 5 minutes. Another example of this that's even faster is like commercials. So if you think about like Super Bowl commercials, you can have a whole story in a 30-second commercial, and it's got like, richness and nuance, and it can be really powerful just in 30 seconds. And so there's a lot of tricks, like memory tricks, going into those stories that, it's all built off of your past associations, because you can't a data commercial, that we could do that. Yeah. That'd be fun. I mean, you can try a 30-second story. The stories are up to 5 minutes, so it could be way shorter. So if you want really awesome examples, like I'd check out Pixar shorts, and then you can also check out like if you Google Super Bowl commercials from, well, I guess any time except for right after the Super Bowl when, because what'll happen is the more popular, more memorable commercials will bubble up over time. And so you want to give them time to, do some quality control. But
I think like that could be cool too. Like, I don't know if we ever end up having time in class to like look at an example of a video and like break it down to see like what analyze it, like what was worked in their video in terms of like making use of psychology and other people's
I mean, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, if you want to, yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah, okay, so we're out of time for today, so we can't do it today. Okay, so I have a few things. So first of all, I guess on Wednesday, we'll go over GitHub pull requests. So sorry we didn't get to it today. And then now that you've submitted assignment 4, that closes off kind of the first the first part of this class. And so moving forward, you're kind of doing things like assignment 4, but on any topic. So you can come up, you analyze any data set, ask any question. It can be your own data, it can be data, public data set. And so the kind of format of the class moving forward is like, we'll kind of combine a lot of the things that we've separated up until this point. So like, pretty much every class will do some brainstorming, some debugging, some discussing, and like you'll all get out of sync in terms of like who's ready at what point with what story. And so, so what I was going to recommend is that you could each come up with, in these moving forward, you can do stories in groups or individually, just like for this assignment. And you can build off prior stories, et cetera. So what I was going to recommend is that you take a look at, you do some digging and brainstorming for data sets or story ideas. And then we can do some workshopping on Wednesday. If you want to find a video clip that you want to share with the class and say okay, how can we distill out the key principles here? I'm happy to analyze a video clip. Probably ideally, you could share it with the class beforehand so that everyone can watch it and then we can discuss it. So either one. Yeah, Kira.
So if things are going to go out of sync, are there going to be deadlines going on or a certain amount of stories we should do or anything like that? Because I know there's only 3 weeks left or something by now.
Yeah, so you should aim to do 3 stories between now and the end of the term. You can do more, but only your best 3 will count towards your grade. So you could do just, do a totally weird one, short one that's just kind of a throwaway and it might go well, might not. And then you could replace it with some other story or, once you get 3 stories in, you can do more or not, and they can be kind of as well-formed or poorly formed as you choose. Nathan, yeah.
This is just kind of a curiosity of mine, but what do you think the least amount of time would be possible to make a very impactful story?
I don't know if there's a minimum amount of time. I mean, I've seen I think it was it a Reddit commercial that was a second long that was super effective. I want to say it was for some Reddit forum, but I don't know why they would advertise.
I'm gonna go for the record.
What?
I'll go for the record for my next video. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in how can you tell really compact stories that could be something to practice.
Mhm.
Yeah, to be honest, it's trickier to tell an effective short story than an effective longer story. So 5 minutes is kind of the balance that I found, that like, you know, it's relatively easy to do a 5-minute story without like endless tweaking.
Mhm.
But, you know, it takes a lot longer to put together like an interesting hour-long story. And then like, you know, if you compress it down to 1 minute, it's very difficult to tell an effective story. But if you want to try it, then by all, yeah, you can practice it. And then if it doesn't go well, you can always redo it or whatever you want.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. All right. We're over time. So let's close for today, and have a great rest of the day, everyone, and see you all on Wednesday. Take care.